What if one small gift could make you question everything you thought you knew? Daniel wasn't ready for the shift that Thursday evening would bring. He had been at work all day, filing reports and answering emails, thinking the week was ordinary, unremarkable. Then, just as he was about to leave, he received a message from his mother-in-law, Susan. "I have something for you. Can you come by tonight?" The tone was casual, but something in it felt deliberate, almost intimate. It made Daniel's chest tighten. When he arrived, Susan opened the door with a smile that seemed softer than usual. The way she looked at him made him pause, a warmth in her eyes he had never noticed before. "I thought you might like this," she said, handing him a small, neatly wrapped box. Daniel hesitated, sensing a significance beyond the object itself. He took it, aware of the electricity in the air. The box contained a finely made leather journal, the scent of lavender faint but comforting. "I thought you might like to write," Susan said. "Sometimes, putting thoughts on paper can make everything clearer." Daniel's fingers brushed the cover, and he realized that this wasn't just a gift. It was a gesture of trust, of care, and, strangely, a subtle invitation into something personal. They sat in the living room, sipping tea. Conversation began casually, about work, about Claire, about the week's small events, but the undercurrent was different. Daniel noticed the way Susan's eyes followed his movements, how she leaned slightly closer when he spoke, how she listened not just to words but to the pauses in his sentences. Every small gesture, every careful glance, made his heart race. Daniel tried to remind himself that it was harmless. Susan was family, after all. But the warmth in the room, the quiet focus on him, stirred feelings he didn't expect. By the time he left, the journal in hand, he felt a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something deeper, an attraction he couldn't explain. Susan's gift had been simple, thoughtful, but charged with a power he didn't yet understand. Back home, the journal rested on his nightstand. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about Susan, her smile, the way she looked at him, the subtle closeness she had offered. Writing in the journal, he tried to capture the swirl of emotions, the mix of excitement and fear. Each word made him feel lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter, because he could express what he felt. Heavier, because he knew the feelings were complicated and unspoken. Over the next few days, Susan visited more often. She would pop in with coffee, or just come to chat, her presence warm and attentive. Every visit was filled with small gestures, fixing his tie, noticing how stressed he looked, making quiet observations that showed she paid attention to him in ways that others didn't. Daniel found himself anticipating her visits, feeling a flutter in his chest whenever he heard her knock at the door. One afternoon, while they were organizing some books in her study, their hands brushed. The touch lasted a fraction longer than necessary. Daniel pulled back, startled, aware of the sudden intensity in his chest. Susan didn't comment. She just gave a small, knowing smile and continued her work, leaving Daniel to grapple with the confusing mix of guilt, excitement, and longing that surged through him. He loved Claire, truly, but Susan's attention was intoxicating in a way he hadn't predicted. She had always been kind and warm, but now there was an intimacy, a connection, that went beyond family. Every shared laugh, every lingering glance, every careful touch made him question the invisible line he had thought existed. The journal was no longer just a gift, it had become a symbol of this new tension, a silent witness to the growing complexity of his feelings. One evening, as Daniel prepared to leave after another visit, Susan reached out, lightly touching his hand. "Promise me you'll use it," she whispered. That small, deliberate touch, accompanied by her quiet words, sent a jolt through him. The air between them seemed to hum with something forbidden yet impossible to ignore. On his drive home, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in just a few short hours. The gift had been simple, but it had opened a door he didn't know he wanted to open. At home, Claire noticed the journal sitting on the counter. "Oh, Susan sent you something?" she asked casually. Daniel nodded, forcing a calm smile. He felt the weight of his secret pressing against him, the knowledge that this small, innocent object had already altered his thoughts and emotions in ways he couldn't control. The days passed, each filled with moments that left Daniel more unsettled. Susan's attention remained gentle, thoughtful, and ever-present. Her visits became the highlight of his day, though he couldn't fully explain why. Her questions, her subtle attentiveness, the way she seemed to know when he needed comfort, all of it pulled at him, tugging him toward feelings he knew were dangerous and inappropriate. Then, late one evening, as Daniel returned the journal to its place, Susan appeared in the doorway. She watched him silently, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the things we don't expect change us the most." Her words weren't about the journal. Daniel felt a chill mixed with anticipation. He understood that whatever had started with a simple gift had the potential to redefine the boundaries he had relied on. That night, Daniel lay awake in bed, the journal beside him, thinking about Susan's eyes, her smile, her touch. He realized he was on the edge of something he had never imagined, something that could either remain a fleeting, innocent connection or grow into something that would alter the course of his life completely. The gift had been small, but the effect was monumental. And he couldn't help but wonder, how far would this unspoken tension go before it demanded a choice? The journal had started it, but Susan's presence, her subtle attentions, and the growing intimacy had taken it beyond a simple gift. Daniel's life had shifted in just a few days. The line between family and forbidden desire had blurred, and he knew there was no turning back. The air between them carried possibility, danger, and something irresistible. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, felt that a single gift could truly change everything. Could a simple visit unravel the careful boundaries you thought were unbreakable? The next morning, Daniel woke with the journal beside him, the memory of Susan's touch still lingering like a whisper. He tried to focus on work, on his routine, but his mind kept drifting to her. By mid-afternoon, he received a text, "Can I stop by later? I found something I think you'll like." His heart skipped a beat. That one message carried weight, hinting at a connection that had become more than ordinary. When Susan arrived, she was carrying a small tray with freshly baked cookies. She smiled, warm and familiar, yet there was a subtle spark in her eyes that Daniel couldn't ignore. "I thought we could have a little treat," she said. She handed him a cookie, and their fingers brushed. That brief contact sent a ripple through him, a mix of excitement and guilt. He knew this was dangerous, but he couldn't help the magnetic pull he felt toward her. They settled in the living room, and conversation began casually, yet every sentence, every glance carried unspoken meaning. Susan's laugh had an unfamiliar softness, and Daniel found himself leaning in slightly, catching nuances he hadn't noticed before. He tried to focus on mundane topics, but each story she told, each joke she made, drew him in closer. The ordinary had become charged with tension. Susan reached for a book on the shelf and handed it to him. Their hands touched again, and Daniel felt the warmth linger. "You're so distracted lately," she observed gently. "Something on your mind?" He hesitated. He could lie, deflect, or pretend, but instead he shook his head, feeling an unspoken trust between them. Susan's eyes softened, understanding passing without words. That silent acknowledgment was dangerous, it encouraged the thoughts he was trying to suppress. Later, she noticed the journal sitting on the table. "I hope you've been using it," she said, her tone light but probing. Daniel nodded. "I have," he admitted, and he realized he was telling her things he hadn't told anyone else. The journal had become more than a gift, it was a bridge between them, a symbol of intimacy and shared understanding. Susan smiled knowingly, and Daniel felt a pull he couldn't resist, an acknowledgement that their connection had quietly shifted into something forbidden yet thrilling. As the evening progressed, the tension in the room grew palpable. Susan leaned closer to Daniel as she shared a story about Claire, her daughter. Her voice was gentle, intimate, and Daniel felt as though every word was layered with unspoken emotion. He tried to focus on the words, but her closeness, her warmth, made his heart race. He noticed the subtle brush of her hand against his, the way she positioned herself near him, the way she listened not just to his words but to his silences. At one point, Daniel excused himself to get more tea. When he returned, Susan was standing near the window, looking out at the street. The soft light from the setting sun illuminated her face, and Daniel stopped in his tracks, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings. He realized this was no longer a casual interaction. Every visit, every small gesture, had been pulling him deeper, blurring the lines of what was appropriate. Susan turned to him with a faint smile. "You know, sometimes people can surprise us," she said softly. Her words felt like a challenge, and Daniel felt a thrill mixed with unease. Could this be harmless affection, or was it something more? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, but impossible to ignore. The visits continued over the week, each one more intimate in subtle ways. Susan noticed the stress in Daniel's eyes after work, gently massaging his shoulders. She shared stories of her own life, revealing vulnerabilities he hadn't expected. Every interaction was carefully balanced, neither overt nor inappropriate, yet Daniel felt a growing connection that went beyond family ties. It was intoxicating, confusing, and undeniable. One evening, while helping Susan organize her kitchen, their hands brushed repeatedly as they reached for the same utensils. Each touch, though accidental, was charged. Daniel pulled back once, startled by the intensity of his own reaction. Susan caught his gaze, and for a moment, the room held a quiet electricity. They both smiled, but Daniel felt the boundaries between family, respect, and desire begin to dissolve. He knew the feeling was wrong, yet it was impossible to deny the pull he felt toward her. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The journal lay open beside him, filled with thoughts he hadn't yet shared with anyone. He wrote about Susan's visits, about the subtle intimacy, about the conflict raging inside him. He tried to focus on Claire, on their life together, but every word he wrote returned him to Susan, to the magnetic tension he couldn't escape. He realized that what had started as a simple gift was evolving into a complex web of feelings, one that might redefine his understanding of love, loyalty, and temptation. The following day, Susan called, her voice casual yet charged with familiarity. "Do you have a few minutes? I want to show you something." Daniel felt a flutter in his chest. This was no longer casual family interaction. Each meeting, each visit, carried weight, and Daniel understood that their connection had moved into uncharted territory. He couldn't predict what would happen, only that he wanted to see her again, despite the fear gnawing at him. When he arrived, Susan led him to her living room. On the coffee table was a small box of photographs from an old trip she and Claire had taken. She opened the box and handed him a picture, their hands brushing once more. Daniel felt a jolt, awareness surging through him. This simple act, sharing a memory, felt intimate in ways he hadn't anticipated. Every laugh, every glance, every shared memory was building a bond that defied the simple labels of family. As the evening wore on, the conversation grew deeper. Susan asked Daniel questions about his hopes, his fears, his life beyond what he shared with Claire. He responded with honesty, drawn in by her genuine interest. The more he opened up, the more he realized how much he valued this connection. It was no longer casual. It was a relationship built on trust, attention, and an undeniable emotional attraction, even if neither of them acknowledged it openly. By the time Daniel left, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the street. He walked to his car, the journal in hand, his mind racing. The feeling of connection, of intimacy, of forbidden attraction, lingered. He knew this was only the beginning. What had started as a simple gift from Susan had grown into a subtle, irresistible tension, one that threatened to unravel the careful life he thought he understood. He didn't know how far it would go, only that each visit, each touch, each conversation pulled him deeper into uncharted territory. Daniel sat in his car, heart pounding, journal open on his lap. He reread the words he had written, realizing that the boundaries he had believed in were fading. Susan's presence was no longer just comforting, it was transformative. Every visit, every gesture, every shared glance carried the potential to change everything. And Daniel knew that by the time he arrived home, he would be questioning everything he had once thought untouchable. Could a single moment of honesty change everything you thought you knew? The days that followed Susan's visits were restless for Daniel. He found himself thinking about her constantly, her voice, her laughter, the warmth of her hand on his. Each memory felt sharper than the last. Work became a blur as he replayed every glance, every subtle touch. He knew he was crossing an invisible line, yet he couldn't stop the pull toward her. It was a Friday evening when Susan called again. "Daniel, do you have a moment? I need your help with something." The casual tone carried an undercurrent he couldn't ignore. He felt his heart quicken as he drove to her house, rehearsing small talk, pretending he could maintain normalcy. Yet the moment he walked in, he realized normalcy was impossible. Susan greeted him at the door, her smile familiar yet charged with a hidden meaning. She led him to the kitchen, where a recipe she wanted his opinion on was spread out. "I've been experimenting," she said, handing him a mixing bowl. Their hands brushed repeatedly as they worked together. Each contact sent a subtle jolt through Daniel, a reminder of the growing tension between them. He tried to focus on the task, on measuring ingredients, on stirring, yet every glance at her face was electric. Susan paused, watching him carefully. "Daniel, have you ever felt conflicted about something you couldn't explain?" she asked, her tone gentle, almost conspiratorial. Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew exactly what she meant, and he wasn't sure how to respond. He shook his head slightly, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking toward her with a mix of curiosity and longing. The conversation deepened, moving from trivial topics to more personal reflections. Susan spoke about her life, her regrets, her dreams. She revealed vulnerabilities she hadn't shared with anyone, and Daniel felt honored and terrified all at once. The intimacy of their exchange was intoxicating. He wanted to step back, to maintain the boundaries of family respect, yet every word drew him closer, blurring the lines further. Suddenly, the oven timer went off. Daniel moved to check it, and Susan followed, brushing against him again. This time, neither flinched. The repeated closeness was a silent acknowledgment of the magnetic tension that had grown between them. Daniel felt guilt gnawing at him, but the thrill was undeniable. Susan's presence was transforming his ordinary life into something charged and unpredictable. After cleaning up, Susan suggested they sit with a cup of tea. They settled into the living room, the soft light of the lamp casting warm shadows. For a moment, they just sat, speaking little, letting the quiet stretch between them. Daniel realized how much he craved these moments, how much he valued the attention and care Susan offered. Every word, every gesture, carried weight, a dangerous intimacy he couldn't ignore. As the evening wore on, Susan grew reflective. "Daniel, sometimes we connect with people in ways we don't expect. It can feel confusing, even wrong, yet it's real." Her eyes held his, steady and unflinching. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew she was speaking of him. He couldn't lie anymore, not to her, not to himself. The honesty in her words mirrored the growing honesty in his heart, even if that honesty frightened him. He shifted slightly, meeting her gaze. I don't know what to do," he admitted softly. "I know how it feels, and I can't ignore it." Susan's smile was gentle, understanding, yet there was a flicker of mischief, a silent recognition that they were both navigating uncharted territory. The trust between them had grown, yet it carried a weight that neither fully understood. Later, as he prepared to leave, Susan handed him a small, wrapped box. "For you," she said, her tone casual but her eyes intense. Daniel felt a jolt. The gift, small as it was, felt symbolic, a secret shared between them, a tangible marker of their evolving connection. He thanked her, but his hands trembled slightly as he held it. He knew that accepting it meant acknowledging more than just friendship. Driving home, Daniel struggled with his thoughts. The box sat on the passenger seat, its presence a constant reminder of the complicated feelings he couldn't escape. Every scenario ran through his mind. What if someone discovered this? What if he acted on these emotions? Yet part of him longed to see Susan again, to explore the connection that had grown beyond casual visits. The risk was immense, yet the pull was irresistible. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat with the box on his lap, feeling its weight and the implications it carried. The journal lay open beside him, filled with words he hadn't shared with anyone. He wrote feverishly, exploring the mix of guilt, desire, and longing he felt. Each entry brought clarity and confusion in equal measure. He knew this path was dangerous, yet the emotional bond between him and Susan had become undeniable. A few days later, Susan called again, asking him to meet at a local cafe. "I just need to talk," she said, her voice casual but urgent. Daniel agreed, his mind already racing with anticipation and dread. When he arrived, Susan was already there, sipping her coffee. She greeted him warmly, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "Daniel," she began, "we can't ignore what's happening between us. We need to be honest." Her words hit him like a wave. He nodded, understanding that she felt the same pull he did. Yet neither spoke of acting on it, only of acknowledging it, recognizing it as real but dangerous. The tension between them was undeniable, a shared secret that bound them more tightly with every encounter. As they parted that evening, the unspoken understanding lingered. Daniel felt both exhilaration and fear. The connection with Susan had grown into something profound, emotional, and complex. Each visit, each conversation, each subtle touch carried layers of meaning he hadn't anticipated. He knew the coming days would test boundaries, morals, and emotions, yet he couldn't imagine stepping away. Susan had become a force in his life he couldn't ignore, a presence that would shape his thoughts, his decisions, and the life he thought he knew. Daniel returned home, the city lights flickering past as he drove. He clutched the small gift from Susan, aware that it was more than an object, it was a symbol, a reminder of the delicate, forbidden connection he now shared with her. He knew that the story between them was far from over. It had shifted into a new phase, one filled with emotional intensity, unspoken desires, and the thrill of walking a line that neither could fully define. As he placed the box on his desk and looked at the journal, Daniel realized the truth: nothing would ever be the same. Their bond had grown beyond family ties, beyond casual affection, into something that challenged every principle he had believed in. And yet, despite the fear, the guilt, and the uncertainty, he felt a strange, undeniable pull toward the future with Susan, an uncharted, thrilling, and potentially dangerous path that neither of them could ignore. What happens when desire and loyalty collide in ways you never expected? The morning after Daniel's cafe meeting with Susan, he felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. He kept thinking about her words, her gaze, the subtle pressure of her hand when they parted. Every moment with her had become a delicate balance of thrill and guilt. He tried to focus on his routine, checking emails, attending meetings, but Susan's presence lingered in his mind, vivid and persistent. By mid-afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed. It was Susan. "I need to see you," the message read. No explanation, no hesitation. His pulse quickened as he agreed, knowing he was heading straight into emotional territory he couldn't control. Driving to her neighborhood, he rehearsed conversations, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. But the truth was, the moment he saw her, his composure vanished. Susan greeted him at the door with a quiet smile, one that carried understanding, invitation, and a subtle warning. "Come in," she said. Inside, the room smelled of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Susan had prepared a small table, just for the two of them. The simplicity of it made the intensity of their connection stand out even more. Daniel realized this was no longer casual visits or polite exchanges, this was something deeper, more dangerous, yet undeniably real. They sat, talking quietly, voices soft but charged. Susan asked him about his feelings, probing gently but insistently. "Daniel, we can't pretend anymore. There's a line here, and I think we've already crossed it," she said. Her words weren't accusatory, they were honest, reflective. Daniel nodded, the weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. He admitted the truth, the emotional pull he felt toward her, the moments he couldn't stop replaying. Susan's eyes softened. "I feel it too," she whispered. The confession changed the atmosphere. They were no longer dancing around the tension, it was laid bare, raw, and undeniable. Daniel felt a shiver of both fear and relief. For months, he had tried to ignore these feelings, to maintain boundaries, to respect the life he had built. Now, the acknowledgment brought both clarity and chaos. The emotional intimacy between them had grown to a point where denial was impossible. Susan moved closer, sitting just across from him, close enough that their knees almost touched. She spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. "Daniel, I don't know where this will lead, but I want honesty. No lies, no pretenses." Daniel swallowed hard. He knew that acting on this bond would carry consequences, but staying away felt equally impossible. Every fiber of his being was drawn to her. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Both flinched. Daniel's heart raced. Susan smiled faintly, a mixture of embarrassment and amusement. "That's probably the delivery for my garden plants," she said. The interruption gave them a moment to breathe, to step back from the edge of their shared vulnerability. Daniel helped her bring the package inside. The mundane task reminded him that their connection existed in a world still bound by ordinary life, yet the undercurrent of tension remained unbroken. Afterward, they returned to the table. Susan handed him a small envelope. "I want you to have this," she said. Inside were letters she had written over the past weeks, words she hadn't shared with anyone, thoughts and feelings she had kept private. Daniel felt the weight of the gesture. Each word spoke of longing, reflection, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them. He understood fully that this was a turning point, a shared secret that tied them closer together. Daniel left Susan's home that evening with the envelope clutched in his hand. Driving back, he realized he was walking a line between desire and loyalty, temptation and morality. Every scenario ran through his mind. How long could they keep this hidden? What would happen if anyone discovered the depth of their emotional connection? Yet, despite the fear, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Susan. She had become a constant presence in his thoughts, a force he couldn't escape. Over the next few days, their interactions became more deliberate, carefully measured, yet charged with unspoken meaning. Every text, every call, every brief visit carried significance. Daniel and Susan shared small moments, coffee in the morning, a brief touch on the arm, a glance across the room, each carrying the weight of a connection that was deeper than either of them had anticipated. They weren't acting recklessly, but the emotional intimacy was undeniable. One evening, as Daniel returned home, he found himself staring at the envelope on his desk. The letters inside were filled with honesty, with emotion, with the acknowledgment of a bond neither of them could ignore. He reread them, feeling a mix of awe, fear, and longing. Susan had trusted him with her feelings, and that trust was a responsibility he couldn't take lightly. Yet, he knew that the emotional connection they shared had grown beyond ordinary boundaries. It was real, it was mutual, and it was transformative. The weekend brought an unexpected challenge. Daniel's wife returned early from her trip, unaware of the emotional whirlwind her husband had been experiencing. The thought of maintaining composure while navigating his complex feelings was daunting. Daniel realized that every action, every decision, carried consequences. He had to tread carefully, balancing the life he had built with the undeniable reality of his bond with Susan. Late that night, Daniel reflected on the past weeks, the growing tension, the shared secrets, the confessions, and the letters. He understood that his life had changed irrevocably. Susan had awakened emotions, desires, and vulnerabilities he hadn't known existed. He also knew that their connection required discretion, respect, and honesty, both with themselves and with others. The emotional intimacy was real, but it was also fragile, a secret they both had to navigate carefully. As the days passed, Daniel and Susan continued to interact, their bond deepening, yet remaining unspoken to the outside world. Each moment together was precious, each gesture meaningful. Daniel understood that he was living in two parallel realities, one of family, routine, and responsibility, and another of emotional intensity, secrecy, and connection. Balancing these worlds was exhausting but exhilarating. Finally, Daniel realized the truth: his life had changed, not because of a single action, but because of the emotional connection he shared with Susan. It wasn't reckless or immoral in intention, it was human, complex, and undeniable. He knew that navigating this bond would continue to challenge his beliefs, emotions, and decisions. Yet, he also knew that Susan had become an integral part of his life, a presence that could not be ignored, and a force that would continue to shape his thoughts, feelings, and future choices. The story didn't end with easy resolutions or clear paths. Instead, it concluded with understanding, the acknowledgement of a deep, emotional connection, a mutual trust, and the awareness that life had changed forever. Daniel held the letters close, feeling both the weight and the comfort of their bond. He knew the journey ahead would be complicated, but he also knew that some connections, once formed, could never be undone. And as he closed his eyes that night, Daniel realized one undeniable fact: his life would never be the same again, and neither would his understanding of love, desire, and human connection. The forbidden, emotional bond with Susan had rewritten his world, leaving him both exhilarated and forever changed.